Their top time for trying to make the breakthrough has kind of gone. They can try to throw more drones and missiles in, but Ukraine appears to be weathering the shock of that.
Yesterday, we saw Donald Trump just before he boarded the helicopter, I think, off to see the tennis. Um, he was asked directly by, it sounded like a Ukrainian journalist, whether he was going to take any actions against Vladimir Putin. And his body language suggested exacerbation. He didn't know what to do. And he said, yes, in the next couple of days. Do you think we'll start to see something out of him the next couple of days, or is he going to find more excuses as to why not to do anything? And do you think he is genuinely exacerbated? And is that because he sees Vladimir Putin as a friend, or the debate has come back out in social media again that Vladimir Putin has got compromise on him, and and therefore is making sure that he doesn't release anything, and he feels between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, what a series of questions. All right, let's talk about King Don. First of all, 2 days or 2 weeks is always his default response. There's going to be a peace settlement in 2 weeks. There's going to be sanctions in 2 weeks. I'm going to win the Nobel Peace Prize in 2 weeks. That's or in 2 days. Like, okay, right. That's just his standard. And he doesn't want to say that report. Oh no, I'm not considering. I'm not going to do it because he looks kind of weak, right? So he goes, oh yeah, I'll be considering. All right, that's the throwaway. In terms of the exasperation, no, that's real. The fact here is he genuinely thought he's going to have this sorted by the spring because he and the Russians are going to carve it up, right? And then the fundamental is that the Russians let him down. I mean, the Russians simply, for him to achieve that Nobel Peace Prize, the Russians had to row back on their aims against Ukraine. They had to take what they have right now, but they wanted even more. And they have consistently overplayed their hand with him. And so what happens here is that he's exasperated again. So how do you exploit that exasperation? Right? That's how do you exploit it. And and Zelensky, again, going on a US channel over the weekend, going on to ABC and saying, look, on the one hand, we need the US in on this. We need the US in on this, but saying, we think they'll do the right thing. He's playing to Trump, through that TV channel. We'll see when he's on Fox next, because, and do it again. And then the Europeans, the French are a bit sidelined today because of their own domestic, political issues. But once the Europeans are back on board, and there's supposed to be a meeting in DC between the Trump folks and the Europeans this week, then they just keep working on Trump like this. You flip this. If you flip this, you say, well, all right, where's the Russians' next play on this, right? Now, the Russians apparently don't have a play to change the facts on the ground. I mean, you could tell me as a military man, but my understanding is probably they got maybe 6 weeks, 2 months before winter starts to set in those areas of Ukraine, right? Their top time for trying to make the breakthrough has kind of gone. They can try to throw more drones and missiles in, but Ukraine appears to be weathering the shock of that. And we talked about the downside of that.
Yeah, no, the Russians have. I don't think the Russians can concentrate a military force enough to create anything decisive in the front line. So we're going to see the stalemate that's there at the moment, unless the Ukrainians are pulling something out of the bag. Because my gut feeling is there's something brewing in the Ukrainian side, but we'll come on to that.
Yeah, well, let's do. But again, then you say, what do they do politically or diplomatically to get the Donald basically to at least fend off the idea of the security guarantees, to fend off the idea that they have to cease fire and so on. And there was a flutter earlier this week from, through Russian state agencies that the Kremlin was considering another invite to him, another showpiece between him and Trump. But again, fact here is the first time you get a Trump, yay, I'm with Vlad moment, which is in Alaska, you get diminishing returns after that. You do it the second and third time, and everybody knows that what Trump wants is he wants to sit down with him and Putin and Zelensky. He wants that to happen. He wants the three-way. So that I think sort of puts it into the, and I'll add, of course, Russian economy at this point, because I love our commenters on YouTube. You've been saying this for 3 years and Russia hasn't collapsed. Newsflash, we never said Russia was going to collapse. We said that the constraints on Russia's military operations are key. And guess what has just happened? Vlad has just implicitly acknowledged that.
Yeah. Well, and again, for those that are listening, a short time frame in diplomatic terms. The peacekeeping mission that's in Cyprus at the minute, when Turkey invaded northern Cyprus in 1974, I think it was described by the United Nations as a short-term operation. It's been going on since 1974. So whenever we're talking about collapse of the Russian economy and all the rest of it, it's not going to happen tomorrow. It might not happen in the next 3 years or 5 years, but that's still short term.
Yeah, and here's the key immediate moment that we focus on is so Vlad's in I think he's in Vladivostok in the Far East last week at an economic forum, and he says, "Ooh, we got gasoline shortages." Really? Now he didn't say why they've got gasoline shortages, which in part is because of the attack on the oil refineries. And Russia does have other problems. They got problems with transport system and so on. But the fundamental is Russia's got gasoline problems. They've got rationing in parts of the country. They've got queues, long lines to get gasoline in other parts of the country. They have got on top of this, newsflash this week is that the central bank has come out again and said we've got worries about inflation. And indeed, the head of one of their largest banks, their state-supported bank, Herman Graf, said, economy's flatlining. We could be going into recession. So combination of recession, inflation, pressure on resources, and you're still going to try to maintain your military invasion at breakneck speed by doing all of that. I don't, and I, and my question is, I don't think I'm not sure if the Ukrainians are going to step it up. I think they'll maintain the level of attacks, but I'd have to ask you where we are with the long range missile, the Flamingo, which they are doing a big PR job on. We've got a domestically produced long range missile. How viable is that missile going to be in terms of changing the balance?
Well, it's very viable. It all depends on the numbers that they've got. But you're right; they're doing a big PR job. And one of the best bits I saw was when they put some footage out of in the factory and chalked on the side of two of the missiles. One was 178 and the other was 179. And everyone's assumed that that's the production numbers that are going through. So just to scare the Russians, there's 179, probably 180 missiles waiting to go. It's a big missile, very capable. But what is interesting at the minute is the way Ukraine is systematically destroying Russia's air defense capability through Crimea and through another couple of paths in occupied the Donbass, but also into Russia as well. And that will allow the Ukrainians then to potentially use the Flamingo missile is not particularly stealth. Most modern cruise missiles survive because they're stealth missiles. This isn't stealth, so you need to do what is called suppression of enemy air defense before you fire those at your primary targets so that they don't get shot out of the sky by air defense missiles. Ukraine is doing that at the minute and is doing it all across Crimea. So it wouldn't surprise me if the Kiev Bridge is going to get thumped at some stage soon by a lot of them. And 1.15 tons of high explosives going in. It's got a range of 3,000 kilometers, so it can do a circuitous route around to get at them, and they can have them coming from multiple directions. It'll be interesting. Something is brewing, I think.
That's a great point. I am going to add a caveat to that, Philip, which will not be a well-known story that we do need to keep our eyes on. And I've got a fantastic young journalist who's working on this story for me for the site that I run, EA Worldview. The fly in the ointment right now is domestic Ukrainian politics. You might remember a few months ago, we were talking about the attempt by parliamentarians to curb the anti-corruption agencies. And the focus at that point was the National Anti-Corruption Bureau and the Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office. You saw the protests that came out that forced Zelensky to withdraw or reverse his signature of that legislation. But the legislators are back at it again, trying to curb the Bureau of Economic Security, which is also, and that bill is in its second reading in the Parliament today. Tomorrow on Tuesday. And of course, there are still people who are being investigated within the Ukrainian system on corruption charges, and this appears to be their next shot against this. What's the upshot of all of this? I could talk to you a little bit about how it hinders Ukraine's relationship with the EU. I can talk a little bit about how it makes it tricky regarding the financial aid that Ukraine gets. But where we are right now is that the one of the problems we've got right now is which is Firepoint, which is the maker of the Flamingo missile. There is being investigated for jacking up prices for its drones. Now, I just meant just investigated, not convicted, not found, but it's being investigated. That has been a fly in the ointment. Part of the reason why, and this is why we title why there was such a PR effort around the Flamingo, some would say was to take away from the investigation of Firepoint, right? And what we have to hope here is well, no, actually, the Flamingo does have this capability. It's not just simply being bigged up.
Yeah, but then the fact that there's an investigation going on and that's coming out, in the old Ukraine following the Soviet style, someone would say there'd be an investigation and the oligarch would have them killed. The fact that there is now an investigation going on and it's looking at it to make sure that the money is not being wasted and prices aren't being artificially inflated, no matter what the outcome of the investigation, the fact that it is happening is showing that there is a level of oversight that should bring confidence with it.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I mean, that to me, that episode earlier this summer highlighted the fact that you could get democracy, you could get accountability. It's an ongoing fight which takes place here, but the site that has broken the story about the investigation is the Kyiv Independent, which is a relatively new publication, very distinctive from the older Ukrainian publications that were linked to the oligarchs. So I think, perhaps on another intent and another front line, we could talk about this is a fascinating story in Ukraine, the way it is evolving and changing.
Oh, when that breaks, we will talk about it. Yes.
Yeah. But to me, it's another, we've talked a lot about that Putin's gamble in February 22. We talk about whether it's a hinge point on history on multiple occasions. And to me, it's a hinge point for the future of Europe. I've talked about this before, the way the EU develops, the way that NATO develops. We don't know exactly where it'll swing as a hinge point given the intersection with the US because Trump is such a wild card here, but it's also a hinge point for Ukraine. I mean, this is a country which is just over 30 years old in terms of being newly independent. It had a lot of systems which were riddled with corruption, riddled with the old Soviet way of doing things. But what you have actually genuinely seen is that as Ukrainians, we don't want it this way. We don't want it done the old way. And I think Putin has fueled that. I think the irony here is that Putin justifying this invasion by a caricature of this was a Nazi government, this was a corrupt government, it hates Russians, has actually spurred Ukrainians to try to make their government better.
Brought Ukraine closer to the potential for EU membership because they're starting to meet the criteria for EU membership and all the rest of it. Scott, I think you've highlighted a number of things that means that we're going to have more of these. So thank you very much indeed for talking to me today on Frontline.
Thanks. All you good folks, stay safe, stay sane, all right?